A hidden torture chamber, videotaped murders, and a taunting letter from the killer. For more than a year, a serial predator prowled St. Louis, targeting vulnerable women and discarding their bodies like refuse. He even mailed a map to a newspaper to prove he was real. It was clear that he wanted to spread terror in whatever way he could. Welcome to Fridays with Tony, where each week we explore stories that are unusual, unsettling, and sometimes unsolved. The brutal crimes of this culprit confounded investigators, and for a while it felt like they would never be able to catch him. But then, one clue sent things into a completely different direction, and you'd never be able to guess where this clue actually came from. Let's start right from the beginning. Women were disappearing, and their bodies were turning up in weeds by lonely roadsides. They were sex workers struggling with addiction, often willing to get in any car for a small payday and a fleeting high. One by one, starting in the spring of 2001, corpses began to appear around the city and across the river in Illinois. Most victims were found nude, strangled, or too decomposed to determine the cause of death. Their remains dumped like trash on the fringes of highways and backstreets. By that summer, a pattern had emerged. The victims were all African American women in their 30s and 40s, known to frequent the St. Louis Streetwalkers Stroll, an area riddled with crack houses and prostitution. Authorities realized they likely had a serial killer on the loose, preying on some of the city's most vulnerable residents. The press dubbed the unknown assailant the Streetwalker Strangler, sometimes called the Bi-State Strangler, and fear spread through the neighborhoods where these women lived and worked. The first known victim was discovered in April 2001. On April 1st of that year, the body of Alicia Greenwade was found, dumped off a roadway in West Alton, Illinois, just across the Mississippi River from St. Louis. She had last been seen in Missouri, suggesting her killer transported her across state lines. Weeks later, in May 2001, a grass cutter on the Illinois side found another nude female corpse in the weeds, identified by a distinctive dental plate as Teresa Wilson, a local woman loved by her family despite her struggles with addiction. In June 2001, a third victim, Verona Thompson, was found in a similar manner less than 20 feet from where Wilson had been discovered. "This was horrendous," said Detective Jana Walters, reflecting on the spate of discoveries. "These are women, regardless of what their trade is. They are mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts. They don't deserve to die this way." Over the following months, more victims surfaced. Betty James was found in mid-2001, and later that year the bodies of Yvonne Cruz and Brenda Beasley turned up in East St. Louis, Illinois. By the end of 2001, at least 6 women had been found murdered in the region under similar circumstances, along with several still unidentified female remains, all believed to be the work of the same killer. The multi-jurisdictional nature of the body dump sites hindered early investigative efforts. City police, county sheriffs, and Illinois state troopers each caught pieces of the puzzle, but it took time to connect the dots. By the end of the summer, it was one after another, recalled St. Louis Police Captain Harry Heger, describing how astonished investigators were by the monthly occurrence of these grisly discoveries. Federal, state, and local law enforcement eventually formed a joint task force with FBI agents John and Melanie Jimenez to hunt the suspected serial killer. They gathered evidence where they could, in one instance recovering a male DNA profile from semen on 2 victims. But without a suspect to match, the trail remained frustratingly cold. The killer's habit of transporting victims over state lines further complicated matters. For example, Greenwade disappeared from Missouri, but her corpse was found in Illinois, while James was last seen in Illinois, but dumped in Missouri. On the streets, Fear mounted among those living the same risky life as the victims, yet the killings continued. For many of the city's street workers, fear was a luxury they couldn't afford. The drug habits that fueled their trade meant that, danger or not, they returned to the same corners each night to earn their next fix. Daytime, nighttime, late night, they're there, observed one St. Louis alderwoman, noting that the prostitutes still walked Broadway even as their friends vanished around them. The conditions that made these women vulnerable were not about to disappear, even with a serial killer stalking their ranks. In May 2002, over a year into the killing spree, a breakthrough came from a macabre twist. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran a humanizing profile on victim Teresa Wilson, detailing her life and struggles, in hopes of reminding the public that she was more than an anonymous statistic. Days after the story ran, Post-Dispatch reporter Bill Smith received an envelope that immediately set off alarms. The American flag stamp on it was inverted, an upside-down flag, a traditional distress symbol. The return address cited iThraldom, a bondage website, but provided no name. Inside, under a bizarre letterhead of flowers, gardening tools, and a beehive, was a chilling typed note in red ink. Nice sob story about Teresa Wilson. Write one about Greenwade. Write a good one, and I'll tell you where many others are. To prove I'm real, here's directions to number 17. Search a 50-yard radius from the X. Put the story in the Sunday paper like the last. To investigators, this anonymous letter reeked of a killer's ego. The writer wasn't just giving directions, he was demanding an audience. By insisting the newspaper write one about Greenwade, and to put the story in the Sunday paper like the last, the killer seemed to crave recognition for his grisly work. He dangled the promise of many others, to find if the media complied. It was a chilling challenge that law enforcement could not ignore. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch immediately turned the disturbing letter and map over to the authorities. Forensics examiners combed the envelope and paper for clues. The only hints were a St. Louis postmark and the iThraldom website in the return address. No useful fingerprints or DNA could be recovered. In the end, the killer's map itself was the key piece of evidence he had given them. Along with this taunting message was a computer-generated map of West Alton, Illinois, the same area where the first victim, Greenwade, had been found. On the map, an X marked a spot near a lonely stretch of road. The implication was clear. The sender claimed to be the killer and was directing authorities to the location of his 17th victim. Detectives were both alarmed and electrified. To prove I'm real, here's directions to number 17, the letter said. A direct challenge. If genuine, this meant that the murderer was not only following the news, but brazenly taunting investigators, and possibly far ahead of them in his body count. Police raced to the map coordinates on May 25, 2002, scouring a field in West Alton. Sure enough, hidden in the tall weeds, they found exactly what the letter promised. A sun-bleached human skull and scattered bones. It was the corpse of a woman, long decomposed to a skeleton. This previously undiscovered victim had been lying just a short distance from where Teresa Wilson and Verona Thompson had been found earlier. The killer's grisly scavenger hunt was real. Investigators finally had solid confirmation that the anonymous letter writer was indeed their serial killer. And now they had something else, a critical clue in the form of that map. It was the break investigators had been waiting for, delivered by the killer himself. Remarkably, within 2 weeks of the letter's arrival, they would pinpoint the murderer's identity. The West Alton map became the investigative linchpin. Detectives recognized it as a printout from Expedia.com or a similar online mapping service. In 2002, using cyberspace as a crime-solving tool was a relatively new strategy, but one that would prove invaluable in this case. This opened up a new avenue of pursuit. The killer had unwittingly left a digital fingerprint. In response to a federal subpoena, Expedia's logs revealed that the map of West Alton, marked with an X, had indeed been downloaded online. Crucially, that only a single user had looked at that exact location in recent days. Each time that user visited, he zoomed in until the on-screen map exactly matched the printout sent with the letter. Every computer session on the internet receives an IP address trail, a unique numeric tag, and that map was no exception. Expedia's records yielded one, 65.227.106.78, the IP address of the mystery mapper. From there, the FBI pressed onward. People think their browsing online is anonymous, but all kinds of people are watching. Cyber law expert Chris Hufnagel noted, explaining how websites routinely log visitor activity. Agents subpoenaed the internet service provider that issued that IP. The ISP turned out to be Microsoft Network, and it still had the account information on file. As it turned out, there was only one user assigned to IP 65.227.106.78 during the relevant period, an account based in St. Louis County under the login name MSN/Maury Travis. The police now had a name and a face for the suspected serial killer, Maury Troy Travis. On June 4, 2002, task force members began surveillance on Travis's modest, ranch-style home in Ferguson, Missouri. The home linked to that crucial IP address. Living alone at that residence, Travis worked as a hotel waiter and was on parole from a 1989 armed robbery conviction. Investigators quietly watched his movements, specifically checking if he frequented areas known for prostitution. They soon noticed that Travis routinely took out his trash each week. Using a creative ploy, agents intercepted the neighborhood garbage truck after pickup one day. They picked it up, and inside the back of the trash truck was this brand new empty container that we dumped all the trash into, Heger said, describing how officers collected Travis's refuse for evidence. Within a day, DNA recovered from a discarded plastic spoon matched the DNA found on victims Cruz and Beasley, tying Travis directly to the murders. Just after sunrise on June 7, 2002, a tactical team of FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, and local police converged on Travis's house with a search warrant in hand. They breached the front door and took the suspect into custody without resistance. With Travis safely removed from the scene, investigators fanned out to methodically scour every inch of the property. Authorities executed the full search warrant raid at Maury Travis's Ferguson home that morning. What they found defied even veteran investigators' expectations. The upstairs of the house was tidy, almost fastidiously clean. Not a speck of dust, noted Detective Kenneth Dye. Travis himself remained calm as police swarmed in. He was immediately arrested and separated for questioning, while teams fanned out to search each room. At first, Travis flatly denied any knowledge of the crimes, even as officers began to uncover damning evidence around him. A few investigators pulled Travis aside while others continued the search. When confronted with photographs of the dead women, he calmly claimed he didn't recognize any of them. It didn't take long for the true nightmare to reveal itself downstairs. In the basement, officers opened a door to a back room and were hit by an overpowering stench of blood and bodily fluids that had been poorly masked by air fresheners. By the beam of a flashlight, investigators could see that Travis had converted this windowless space into a personal torture chamber. The walls were painted an unusual shade of blue, and the floor was covered with dark carpeting, now deeply stained. A bare mattress lay on the concrete. Scattered nearby was what one agent described as a serial killer's toolkit: a stun gun, coils of rope and restraints, rolls of duct tape, chains, leather belts, and wooden boards, many of them caked with old blood. In a closet, investigators found more ligatures and chains hanging, some still smeared with blood, physical remnants of unspeakable acts. Travis had tried to use room deodorant down there and everything, but the smell was too strong, Detective Dye later said of the blood-soaked chamber. The scene was so gruesome that some investigators would later require counseling. Blood spatter analysis later showed that blood from at least 6 different victims coated the walls, having seeped through multiple layers of paint. There was so much blood hidden in the walls, recalls Detective Jana Walters. He painted over it. He killed. Blood. Paint. Killed. Blood. Paint. This went on for layers and layers. In other words, each time Travis murdered, he would repaint his basement to hide the evidence, creating a grotesque palimpsest of violence beneath the fresh paint. One detective bluntly dubbed the basement a chamber of horrors after seeing its bloody confines. Perhaps most chilling of all was what detectives found behind a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf in the basement TV room. Tucked out of sight were dozens of VHS videotapes. Many were innocuously labeled as home movies or even children's cartoons, but their contents were something out of a nightmare. These were the killer's homemade snuff films, recordings of Travis brutalizing his victims in that very basement. One tape bore an iconic label, "Your Wedding Day," but contained scenes of rape, torture, and murder. Police Chief Joe Makwa, after viewing some of the footage, ordered psychological counseling for every officer exposed to it. "They'll give you nightmares," Makwa warned, describing the video evidence. In a telling detail, Travis had saved newspaper clippings about the murders, a sign that he followed the media coverage of his own crimes. The tapes revealed the full extent of Travis's sadistic crimes. In fact, many tapes began innocently, showing Travis partying with his victims, giving them crack cocaine to smoke after engaging in consensual sex, after which he let some women get dressed and leave unharmed. But in other cases, the encounters took a horrific turn. The women, many appearing dazed or high from the drugs he provided, were seen initially in seemingly casual encounters with Travis in his bedroom. Then the recordings showed Travis's demeanor shift. In scene after scene, he would coerce or force his victims into bizarre rituals. In some footage, he made the women dance with white clothing or don sunglasses with the lenses blacked out so they could not see. With chilling patience, Travis then bound his victims hand and foot using ropes or cuffs and sealed their eyes with duct tape. Sometimes he tied them directly to a wooden support post in the basement, effectively shackling them in place for what was to come. On the tapes, Travis can be heard taunting and tormenting the terrified women. He berated them viciously, often zeroing in on their personal lives. In one recorded exchange, Travis mocks a victim about her children.
You want to say something to your kids? Mama, sorry. Who raising your kids? Me and my mom and dad. You ain't raising shit. You on here in your back smoking crack. You ain't going home tomorrow. I'm going to keep you about a week.
The cruelty in his voice is unmistakable. He wanted these women to feel utter despair. To another victim, he gave an order to recite a degrading oath of submission. "You are the master. It pleases me to serve you." When she mumbled it in fear, Travis barked, "Say it clearer." Not even the victim's blindfolds spared them from his sadism. When one captive, blinded by duct tape, fumbled and accidentally knocked his camera out of focus, Travis snarled, "You don't need to see S. Lie down on your back. Shut your eyes." Travis's own voice is often the only voice heard on the tapes, besides his victims' pleas. He seemed to revel in narrating his actions. In one macabre moment recorded after a murder, Travis turns the camera on the lifeless body and announces to no one in particular, "First kill is 19 years old. Name? I don't know. I don't give a F."
This is first kill, number 1. First kill was 19 years old. Name, I don't know.
It was as if he was creating a twisted documentary of his achievements, breaking the fourth wall to brag about killing. Through these videos, police identified at least 12 distinct victims, matching many of the women found dumped around St. Louis. And they suspected some tapes might correspond to victims not yet discovered. In Travis's perverse collection of footage, he had essentially filmed his own criminal record. The media would later dub him the videotape killer. One especially eerie discovery was a hand-drawn diagram found among Travis's papers. It appeared to be plans to expand his basement torture chamber, indicating he had no intention of stopping at 17 victims. The drawing showed 2 additional makeshift cells he envisioned building downstairs to hold captives long-term. He even made a list of materials he would need: concrete blocks, chains, and other items, essentially a blueprint for more elaborate cruelty to come. He was going to build 2 cells where he could chain the women, so he could keep these women captive for some time, Captain Heger revealed, underscoring Travis's meticulous and premeditated sadism. The evidence now in hand painted a portrait of a calculating killer who not only tortured for pleasure, but planned an ongoing dungeon of captivity. Maury Travis had a rather ritualistic way that he would kill his victims, noted Dr. Brianna Fox, a criminologist, describing how he would toy with and degrade the women, even making them confess for their supposed sins as part of his perverse ritual. With Maury Travis under arrest and a mountain of incriminating evidence seized from his home, investigators expected a lengthy legal process ahead. Travis was promptly charged with 2 counts of kidnapping resulting in death, specifically for the interstate abductions of victims Alicia Greenwade and Betty James. Prosecutors focused on the 2 murders with clear evidence tying Travis across state lines, but additional charges for other victims were expected to follow. In custody, however, Travis maintained a cold arrogance. He initially denied everything, despite the videotapes and forensics. Investigators even spread out photographs of the victims in front of Travis in the interrogation room, but he barely glanced at them and repeated that he didn't know any of those women. According to those present, he seemed cocky and unfazed as detectives confronted him with the horrifying evidence. Only when he was being transported to the St. Louis Police headquarters did Travis finally drop the facade. He hinted that he was willing to talk. Back at the station, Travis told officers he would make a full confession, but only after he was appointed a lawyer to represent him. It was a tantalizing promise. At last, the full scope of his crimes and motives might be revealed, and families might learn the fates of missing loved ones. Detectives and FBI agents could hardly contain their anticipation when you hear that a task force searched and tracked down the monster that was among us, a serial killer. It's like a roller coaster of emotion, said former East St. Louis Mayor Deborah Powell, reflecting the community's mix of relief and horror at Travis's capture. The question loomed: what made Maury Travis a serial killer? Those who knew him were stunned. Travis had been raised by a loving mother in a middle-class household and even spent his youth volunteering at nursing homes and attending church. He joined the Army Reserves and later enrolled in college. But a dark turn came in the late 1980s. Travis developed a heavy cocaine habit, flunked out of school, and turned to armed robbery to fund his addiction. In 1989, he was caught and sentenced to 15 years in prison for holding up shoe stores at gunpoint. After serving less than half his sentence, Travis was paroled in 1994. By 2000, he was out of prison entirely, and within months, if not weeks, he had begun murdering women. Teresa Wilson's death in spring 2001 coincided closely with Travis's return to the area from prison, suggesting that, once free, he wasted little time in unleashing the violent fantasies he'd been nurturing for years. Now in custody in 2002, it seemed Maury Travis might finally be compelled to answer for those crimes. St. Louis Police Chief Joe Machwa publicly stated that Travis was believed to have murdered between 12 and 20 women, based on the timeline and evidence. Indeed, police had identified 12 of his victims by name, all prostitutes whose bodies were dumped around Greater St. Louis between March 2001 and May 2002. But Travis's own boast in the letter, 17 victims, suggested there were more bodies out there unaccounted for. He claims he killed 17 women. "We're missing 5 of them," Chief Machwa noted grimly, referring to the gap between the 12 known victims and Travis's claim. Investigators hoped that Travis would reveal those missing names and locations as part of his promised confession. Every jurisdiction involved held its breath that this case, as horrific as it was, might soon yield answers and a measure of closure. Maury Travis never confessed. Just 3 days after his capture, before he could be tried or divulge the full truth, he took matters into his own hands. On June 10th, 2022, jail guards found Travis dead in his cell at the St. Louis County Jail. The 36-year-old had hanged himself with a bedsheet. Travis had been placed on suicide watch with 15-minute intervals, though guards inexplicably missed 2 scheduled visits that night. Yet he managed to find the one blind spot in his cell just out of view of the video monitor. In that corner, he ingeniously threaded a noose made from a bedsheet through the small holes of an air vent above his toilet. In a final act of control, he even stuffed wads of toilet paper into his nostrils and gagged himself with a piece of cloth, then pulled a pillowcase over his head. Using techniques reminiscent of the bondage methods he had practiced on his victims, Travis bound his own hands behind his back and then stepped off the toilet, hanging himself until he was lifeless. He left behind a suicide note addressed to his mother. In it, Maury Travis confessed, "I've been sick for a long time, since I was 14. The chilling admission suggested that Travis's dark urges had deep roots. Indeed, there were later reports that, as a teenager, he tortured animals, even killing a neighbor's dog, hinting at budding violent tendencies long before his murder spree. He gave no further information about his crimes. In another note intended for authorities, Travis bluntly stated that he would rather kill himself than face execution or life behind bars, fully aware that the heinous nature of his crimes likely meant a death sentence if convicted. And so, with that act, the self-proclaimed videotape killer escaped worldly justice, taking with him the full truth of his crimes. For the investigators who had worked so hard to catch him, Travis's suicide was a devastating blow. They would get no confession, no answers to the pressing questions of why he did it and who all his victims were. "We lost a tremendous amount of valuable information," lamented Gene Heckler, police chief of Columbia, Illinois, where one of Travis's victims had been found. Still, authorities from several jurisdictions said they would not close their files with Travis's death. They continued to sift through the forensic evidence, comparing Travis's DNA to cold cases and analyzing tire track impressions from dump sites, in hopes of definitively linking him to each murder. "We still feel confident we will be able to go forward with this case," insisted Lieutenant Terry Remelius of the Illinois State Police, expressing determination to continue despite the suspect's demise. Maury Travis's case remains one of the most haunting in modern serial crime history, not only for the sheer brutality of his acts, but for the way he nearly got away with it. His crime spree remains one of the most chilling chapters in Missouri's criminal history. It is a cautionary tale of how a friendly face can mask unfathomable cruelty, and how even when a killer is unmasked, the full truth may die with him. Yet by remembering the victims and tirelessly pursuing every clue, investigators and families ensure that the women he harmed are never forgotten. I know the police, FBI, and prosecutors were upset that Travis was able to commit suicide, but he's gone. And I have to say that I'm not upset about that fact. If you have any thoughts on the matter, please share them in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and join me next week for another Fridays with Tony. See you then.